Hollywood is at war. I'm not talking about a war film or some sort of culture war. No, the movie industry is fighting a ruthless and calculated campaign against one particular target: men's facial hair. What, you ask? That seems absurd. You may think so, viewer, but I have the evidence to prove my case. I'm AJ, a filmmaker and storyteller, and today I am going to expose the sinister conniving of the motion picture industry and defend men's facial hair. Be warned: film spoilers, historical misinterpretation, and utter nonsense ahead. I need to begin by defending my thesis. What evidence is there to show that Hollywood hates men with facial hair? Plenty. In fact, the evidence is what first drew my attention to this secret war. Over half a decade ago, I watched the superhero movie Wonder Woman. A mediocre movie, but one that was set in the historical context of World War I. As a lover of history, this setting appealed to me. However, imagine my shock and horror when I first beheld the villain of the film, General Ludendorff. Now, Ludendorff was a real man, one of Germany's top generals during the war, so it did make sense to cast him as the villain. His motivations and plans were distorted, but that was to be expected, since the film was adapting him to tell its own story. The most glaring issue with his portrayal, however, was his shorn upper lip. Ludendorff's mustache was nowhere to be seen. This was a small change, I grant you, but the longer I thought about it, the more disturbing it became. Why take away his mustache? Perhaps, I reasoned, it was to make him look more evil. But look at a picture of the real Ludendorff, and you can easily see that he looked far more villainous in real life than he does in the film. Ah, I thought, it's to throw us off the scent of the identity of Ares. Throughout the film, Wonder Woman is trying to stop Ares, which she believes will cause the war to end. She believes that Ludendorff is Ares, so maybe taking away his mustache was the filmmakers trying to make him look more like the god of war. After all, what kind of Greek god would have a mustache? But then, the real Ares is revealed, and it is a man with a mustache.
Then I will destroy you!
If Ludendorff is supposed to be a red herring, if he is the one we are supposed to believe is Ares, then why not let him look like the actual Ares? By this point, there was no conceivable reason that I could see to not let Ludendorff keep his mustache. I was suspicious, but I wrote it off as just a strange quirk. Then, several years later, my suspicions re-emerged when I watched The Ghost and the Darkness. 1996's The Ghost and the Darkness is based on the true story of the Savo man-eaters, a pair of lions that devoured dozens of railway workers in 1898. The film stars Val Kilmer as John Henry Patterson, the British officer overseeing the railway's construction, who eventually ended up killing the two lions. While it's not the best of films, it was an enjoyable and suspenseful watch. When I looked up the true story after watching the film, though, I had a horrifying realization. The real-life Patterson was mustached. It was the Ludendorff situation all over again. Why? 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 It just kept going in my head. Why would this happen? Popular culture expects that British officers of the period would be mustached, so it's not as though keeping the mustache would have seemed out of the ordinary. Perhaps Kilmer simply didn't like mustaches and didn't feel like growing one. And yet, only 3 years previously, he had grown one for the role of Doc Holliday in Tombstone. What reason for the lack of facial hair then, except for a conspiracy most foul?
If it's any consolation, you had me convinced.
It's not.
I only had 2 pieces of evidence, but I felt that I had stumbled onto something, so I kept my eyes open over the following years. I saw more movies that lent credence to my suspicions, and as I researched more and more films, I began to see a startling pattern emerge. Mustaches and facial hair were being shaved off the portrayals of historical figures in films. It wasn't just relatively recent films, either. Desmond Doss lost his mustache in Hacksaw Ridge, but so had Alvin York in Sergeant York, a film made more than half a century earlier. William Wallace, a well-known and bearded figure, is shockingly clean-shaven in Braveheart. John Chard and Gonville Bromhead both lost their facial hair in Zulu, as did Oliver Cromwell in Cromwell. Throughout the history of cinema, filmmakers have been ruthlessly ripping off historical figures' facial hair. Not every historical figure, and not all at once, but subtly and secretly. As shocked as I was to uncover this conspiracy, I still had no idea why it was happening. What reason could there be to wage a war on mustaches and beards? To answer that question, we need to go back to the very beginning of motion pictures, with the invention of the kinetograph by Thomas Edison and William Dixon. Edison, as avaricious as he was clean-shaven, claimed the patent on the device, as he did on so many others which his employees developed. But many of these early films have mustached men in them, so how could the war have started here? Well, you see, the motion picture war was only a continuation of an earlier, more bitter war, the war over electrical currents between Edison and his hated rival, Nikola Tesla. Not only did Edison despise Tesla for inventing a better system of electrical power, but he also loathed his classy mustache. Edison realized that the best revenge against Tesla was not to simply beat him in the short term, but to destroy his image in the long term. If he could use the power of the new motion picture industry to shape public opinion, he could discredit facial hair and make Tesla look like a fool for his iconic mustache. And so, in secret, Edison set in motion his plot. As Hollywood grew more and more influential, more and more historical figures were reworked to be clean-shaven. Edison's self-perpetuating plot, run through directors and producers and other people in the motion picture industry which he somehow had connections to, was remaking every man in history to look more like Edison than like Tesla. Few noticed these changes, and of those who did, most simply brushed it off as coincidence. Now, though, I have uncovered the truth, and now you know the truth, too. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Thank you for watching. I had a ton of fun coming up with this ridiculous theory, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. If you'd like to see some more grounded video essays about films and filmmaking, and less about mustaches and conspiracy theories, please like and subscribe.